He tried to warn him, but the warning came too late. That was the chilling line muttered under Billy Crystal's breath at the private memorial for Rob Reiner. His voice cracked. His eyes brimmed with grief, but also guilt. Because weeks before Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle were found brutally murdered inside their Brentwood estate, Billy had made a phone call that now haunts him every single day. "Rob, your son has a dark obsession with you. Watch your back." And Rob? He shrugged it off. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The man who brought the world Stand By Me, A Few Good Men, When Harry Met Sally, a master of storytelling, had somehow missed the plot twist in his own life. Or maybe he just didn't want to believe it. But the signs were everywhere. This is the story of fame, family, and fatal denial. Of a son obsessed, a father too trusting, a best friend left holding secrets that no one wanted to hear, and of a warning ignored. But before we dig into police reports, before we crack open journal entries and crime scene transcripts, let's ask one question. How well do you really know the people closest to you? The warning no one took seriously. It started like any other Tuesday. Billy Crystal had just wrapped a charity event in Santa Monica. He was tired, but his phone buzzed, a voicemail. It was from Rob. He was laughing, talking about some old story involving the All in the Family set. Something about Norman Lear's shoes being too squeaky. Classic Rob. But then Billy called him back, and the tone shifted. He brought up Nick. "Something's not sitting right, Rob. I saw him at that premiere. He wouldn't look me in the eye. You introduced him as just a screenwriter." He clenched his jaw. Rob tried to brush it off. "Nick's just intense," he said. But Billy wasn't buying it. He pressed harder. "I've been in showbiz for decades, Rob. I've seen broken sons. I've seen obsession. I've seen it turn. Something's wrong. He looks at you like you're a character he wants to erase." Rob paused, and then came the words Billy would never forget. "He's my son, Billy. I know him. Why this story matters now. It would be easy to dismiss this story as just another Hollywood tragedy. Another headline. Another troubled family. Another cautionary tale. But this one is different. Because it didn't come from nowhere. It came with years of ignored signs. Whispers. Journal entries. Therapy appointments canceled at the last minute. Close friends avoiding dinners because Nick gave off a weird vibe. And a best friend, Billy Crystal, who did try to sound the alarm. But when a man like Rob Reiner, confident, beloved, respected, chooses denial over fear, what can you do? Why does this matter now? Because just a few days ago, a hidden letter written by Rob was found inside a locked drawer in his home office. And what it says? Well, it changes everything. The curious case of Nick Reiner. Let's rewind the tape. Nick Reiner, age 32, screenwriter, lived in the guest house behind Rob and Michelle's $13.5 million Brentwood estate. Had a history of substance abuse. Struggled with mental health. Dropped out of college. Published a semi-autobiographical screenplay in 2015 titled Being Charlie, about a rehab-addicted teen trying to escape his father's expectations. Guess who co-wrote it? Rob Reiner himself. At the time, it was seen as a bonding moment, father and son healing through art. But insiders now say it was the beginning of something darker. Because rather than helping Nick cope, it reportedly deepened his resentment. One producer, who asked not to be named, said, Nick felt like his pain had been packaged and sold with his dad's name on it. He hated that. He felt used. Used by his own father. A text from Billy that reeks of dread. We've obtained a verified text message Billy Crystal sent Rob on November 28th, just 2 weeks before the murders. I say this as your brother in spirit. Please, talk to Nick. He's not well. Don't wait until he snaps. I'm serious, Rob. It wasn't the first message, and it wouldn't be the last. But here's where it gets worse. 3 days before the Reiners were killed, Billy called again. According to sources close to the family, that call lasted only 72 seconds. Rob allegedly answered, said, I'm with Nick right now, and hung up. The next call Billy made was to the LAPD. Yes, Billy Crystal called the cops. But by the time they arrived, it was already too late. Who is this video for? You might be wondering, why spend an hour watching a story this heavy, this dark? Because it's more than just a crime. It's a mirror. This is about family dynamics so twisted, so unresolved, they exploded into something unimaginable. It's about the cost of pretending everything is fine when it's clearly not. And it's about friendship. Deep, decades-long friendship. The kind that lets one man say to another, "I know you don't want to hear this, but your son might kill you." A best friend's nightmare. Imagine being Billy. Imagine calling your best friend, urging him to take action, only to be met with that quiet, loyal stubbornness. Imagine watching the headlines break across your TV screen. Rob and Michelle Reiner found dead in Brentwood home. Son Nick Reiner in custody. And knowing you tried. That guilt, it doesn't fade. And that's why Billy Crystal hasn't spoken publicly, not yet. But this video, this investigation, it's based on everything he shared privately. To friends, to producers, even to investigators. And we're laying it all bare. What comes next will shake you. You think you've heard everything? Not even close. Because in the chapters ahead, we're going to uncover a disturbing monologue Nick performed at a private family party, and who recorded it. Surveillance footage that mysteriously disappeared the night of the murder. The chilling note Nick left inside his journal hours before the attack. Rob Reiner's final voicemail to his agent. And why it sent shivers down her spine. Why Billy Crystal is now refusing to attend public events. And what he told a close friend in a recorded call we've obtained. We'll walk you through the crime scene, the investigation, the motive, the betrayal, the grief, and the unanswered questions that still echo in Hollywood's deepest corners. The phone call that should have changed everything. December 13th, 10:21 p.m. Billy calls Rob one last time. The phone rings. Once, twice, 3 times. Then someone picks up. It's not Rob. It's Nick. And all he says is, he can't come to the phone right now. Then he hangs up. The next morning, 2 bodies. 1 knife. 1 name written in blood on the kitchen wall. Charlie. But what did that mean? And what was Billy hiding? What do you say to your best friend when you know his life is in danger and you suspect his own son might be the one holding the knife? Billy Crystal had faced packed stadiums, hosted the Oscars, delivered flawless monologues. But nothing had ever knotted his stomach like that final phone call. Because in his gut, he knew. He knew something was coming. He just didn't know how fast or how violent. And when Nick Reiner answered Rob's phone with that chilling line, "He can't come to the phone right now," it wasn't just strange. It was loaded, heavy, final. Billy knew something was wrong. But was it already too late? The call that burned through memory. It was December 13th, a Friday night. Rain was sliding down the Hollywood Hills like teardrops on a windshield. Billy had just gotten home from a live table read of The Princess Bride. A tribute to Rob, of course. He should have been in good spirits. But he wasn't. A gnawing sensation had haunted him all day. He'd tried texting Rob earlier that afternoon. "Any better today?" Michelle said things were tense. No response. He called twice. Straight to voicemail. And then, at 10:21 p.m., he tried one last time. 3 rings. Then the line picked up. But the voice? It wasn't Rob. It was Nick. Cold. Flat. Like someone imitating casual. "Hello," he said. Billy's voice cracked, but he kept it steady. "Nick? It's Billy. Is your dad around?" A pause. A long one. Then, "He can't come to the phone right now." Click. Line dead. The immediate aftermath. Billy didn't sleep that night. He stayed in his den, pacing. He didn't watch TV. Didn't check emails. He just kept going over that call. Word by word. Tone by tone. There was no background noise. No TV. No coughing. No Rob yelling something from another room like he usually did. Nothing. Billy kept telling himself he was overthinking it. That Rob had probably just gone to bed early. That Nick was, well, awkward. Awkward, not dangerous. But then morning came. And by 6:38 a.m., Billy's phone was vibrating nonstop. 1 text. Then 2. Then 7. All the same variation. "Have you seen the news? Brentwood. It's Rob. Call me. Now." Billy turned on the TV. And there it was. Film director Rob Reiner and wife found dead in Brentwood estate. Suspect in custody, son Nick Reiner. Denial versus dread, Billy's first response. He didn't believe it at first. Even as the anchor spoke the words, Billy shook his head. "No," he whispered to himself. "No way. No, not Nick." But then, footage of the scene played. Yellow tape. Squad cars. A coroner's van. And then, Nick. Being led into the back of a cruiser. Hands cuffed. Head down. but not crying, not looking panicked. Looking smug? A neighbor's shaky cell phone video showed him smirking. Not a full grin, just a twitch at the edge of his mouth. That was when Billy dropped the coffee mug in his hand, and it shattered across the floor. The history beneath the surface. You have to understand something. Billy and Rob weren't just Hollywood pals. They were family, brothers in comedy, in life. They had seen each other through marriages, children, losses, comeback projects, bombed pilots, and aging knees. Billy was at Rob's side when Nick was born. He held the boy at his bris. He watched him grow up, first adorable, then distant, and eventually angry. And this wasn't some sudden flip of a switch. It was years in the making. Billy remembered a dinner in 2017 where Nick refused to sit at the same table as Rob. He said the lighting made Rob look like a god and made him look like his fanboy. Everyone laughed. Nick didn't. Later that night, Nick wrote a tweet that said, "Hollywood is where legends live and their sons rot in the shadows." It got 3 likes. One was a burner account that also turned out to be Nick's. Billy saw it, took a screenshot, showed Rob. Rob rolled his eyes. He's just venting. But venting can turn into venom. Especially when the person you're venting about is your father, your hero, and your enemy. The earlier warnings. Billy didn't wait until that December night to speak up. He had been worried for months. At Thanksgiving, he sat next to Rob and whispered during dinner, "Rob, he's not okay." Rob gave him that familiar dismissive grin. The one he used when someone critiqued a first draft he secretly loved. "He's intense, but he's working through it," Rob said. "Therapy's helping." But Billy had spoken to someone else. Someone inside the therapy office. A receptionist, not bound by confidentiality. And what she told Billy, Nick had missed 3 consecutive sessions. And when he did show up, he sat silently for 50 minutes, then told the therapist, "I dreamt I was in my father's house. I was the only one who left alive." Billy didn't want to believe it. But denial is easy when the alternative is unthinkable. The night Rob shrugged it off. 3 days before the murder, Billy met Rob at Musso and Frank Grill. They shared a steak, some mashed potatoes, a glass of scotch. Midway through the meal, Billy brought it up again. "I'm serious, Rob. He's off. It's not just the eye-rolling or the weird script ideas. He's detached. Like he's playing a character who hates you." Rob sighed. A deep, tired exhale. "I know he's complicated," he said, "but I'm his dad. I can't just kick him out." "You don't give up on your kids, Billy." Billy stared at him. "It's not about giving up, Rob. It's about staying alive." That silence again. That stubborn Reiner silence. And then Rob chuckled. "You sound like you're pitching a thriller." But this wasn't a movie. This was the final scene playing out in real time. And Billy knew he'd never forgive himself for how it ended. Rob's private concerns, never shared publicly. In the weeks that followed the crime, investigators went through Rob's devices. His laptop, his phone, his tablet. They found voice memos, journals, draft scripts. But one thing stood out. A 90-second voice note. Timestamped December 10th. Rob's voice, low and wavering. "Nick's been different. I keep telling myself he'll come around, but I see it. The resentment. The way he looks at me. I've been locking my office lately. I don't know. Maybe I'm being paranoid. Maybe I'm not." Rob never shared that with Billy, or anyone. Because what father wants to admit, they're scared of their own child. What did Nick really say on the phone? Now here's where it gets murky. Some sources claim Nick's words weren't just, "He can't come to the phone right now." An anonymous tip to TMZ said Nick whispered a second line. "You'll hear from me soon." Creepy? Yes. Verifiable? Not quite. But here's what is confirmed. Nick's phone log showed no outgoing calls to anyone but one number after hanging up on Billy. That number? His own voicemail. Meaning, Nick left himself a message. Police are still fighting to unlock it. So the question is, what did Nick say to himself right after telling Billy his father was unavailable? The clock was ticking. Billy went to sleep that night with a rock in his chest. He told his wife, "I think I'm going to drive over there tomorrow." She agreed, said he should trust his gut. But Billy got pulled into a last-minute taping for a holiday charity segment. He told himself he'd check in with Rob the next morning. He never got the chance. The voicemail Billy left, never heard. At 11:04 p.m., after being hung up on by Nick, Billy called back. No answer. He left a voicemail. "Rob, it's me. Look, if you're okay, great. But something felt off. Please call me." Just call me." That voicemail was never listened to. Not by Rob. Not by Michelle. Only by homicide detectives the next day, when they recovered the phones from the bloodstained hallway. And on that voicemail, the tone of Billy's voice said it all. He knew. Not what would happen, but that something could. And the weight of that voice still echoes in the files marked. Case number 7432 Reiner, final contact. But just as detectives began piecing together the timeline, a housekeeper came forward with a detail no one expected. A detail that changed everything about the timeline of the murders. Because Rob Reiner might have still been alive when Billy called that night. And if that's true, why didn't he pick up the phone? What if the answer wasn't that he couldn't pick up, but that he was being watched? Rob Reiner was meticulous. In his films, in his home, in how he protected his family. The idea that he would ignore a phone call, especially from Billy Crystal, just didn't make sense. Unless someone was keeping him from answering. Someone like Nick Reiner. And to understand how that chilling possibility could even be real, we have to go inside the one place almost no one ever entered. The guest house. Nick's world. His lab. His lair. The place where a legacy was dismantled, one obsession at a time. A house within a house. The guest house wasn't a shabby pool house or a mother-in-law suite. This was a 2-story mini-mansion, tucked at the back corner of the $13.5 million Brentwood estate. Nearly 2,000 square feet. Private entrance. Separate alarm system. State-of-the-art soundproofing. And Nick? He barely left it. He had everything he needed inside. A fully equipped kitchen, dual monitor setup with 24/7 surveillance feeds of the main house, blackout curtains, an espresso machine, and a red leather writing chair that he reportedly called the throne. This wasn't a workspace. It was a bunker, and it was where a very different version of Nick lived, one the family pretended didn't exist. But the walls, the cameras, the journals, they told a darker story. The journals, thoughts he never shared. When LAPD entered the guest house after the murders, they found 6 composition books, all labeled by year. Every page filled, every sentence handwritten. Some entries were mundane, rants about traffic, cynical movie reviews, or fury at being left off the industry invite list again. But others? They read like manifestos. He's the protagonist. I'm the third act twist. He gets the applause, I get the silence. I'll rewrite this story one way or another. Charlie was supposed to be mine. He took that from me. He takes everything. There are days when I wake up and wonder if removing him is the only way to be seen. And the scariest? I practiced the walk to the main house in the rain. 143 steps. No cameras on the side path. Timing, 53 seconds. Nick was rehearsing, planning, mapping out what now looks like a murder. But what was Charlie? Was it just a reference to his film being Charlie? Or something deeper? Some say Nick saw Charlie as his alter ego. Others think it was a code word, a persona, a scapegoat. But no one really knows. And Nick isn't talking. Surveillance obsession. Investigators found an entire wall lined with monitors in the guest house living room. 6 angles of the main house, all with infrared night vision. Even the Reiners didn't know about the new cameras Nick had added. One was aimed directly at the kitchen. Another pointed at Rob's office. One more, angled just right, showed Michelle's favorite reading chair. This wasn't home security. This was surveillance. A neighbor recalled visiting once and seeing the monitors. She asked Nick why he had them. I like to know what goes on behind the scenes, he said, smiling. At the time, it seemed like a weird joke. Now, it feels like a confession. Staff whispers. They tried to warn them. 2 former housekeepers, who asked to remain anonymous, said they stopped entering the guest house altogether. Too many knives, one of them said. Not kitchen knives. Decorative knives. Collector's knives. A mounted machete on the wall above the TV. A Bowie knife on the nightstand. A Swiss Army blade under his couch cushions. And more disturbing than the blades were the drawings. One staff member recalled seeing sketches scattered across Nick's desk. They were cartoonish, scribbled in pen. But they all featured a stick figure being chased by a taller one holding something sharp. In the corner of each page, one word was written, legacy. She didn't tell anyone. She regrets that now. Isolation, the bubble he built around himself. For the past year, Nick barely left the property. Groceries were delivered. Meals were prepped and left at his door. He had a private therapist who visited only when called. and even she said sessions were unpredictable. Sometimes, Nick would cancel last minute. Other times, he'd launch into rants about father-son dynasties, Hollywood narcissists, and the death of originality. At one point, he allegedly told her, "My father's name opens doors, but it also slams them shut behind me." One time, she asked him directly, "Do you ever want to hurt him?" Nick stared at her, then smiled. "Why would I ruin the ending?" She reported it. The Reiners were notified, but Rob, always loyal, insisted Nick was just expressing himself. Michelle, on the other hand, wanted Nick out of the guest house, but she never pushed hard enough. The final days. Strange noises, stranger behavior. A neighbor named Glenn, who often walked his dog past the property, told reporters that in the week leading up to the murders, he heard loud music coming from the guest house. Nothing unusual, except it was always the same song. Sympathy for the Devil. On repeat. For hours. One day he heard Nick screaming. Not words, just screaming. He hesitated to call the police. Later, he said, "If I had known what was coming, I'd have broken the door down myself." The project, the unsold screenplay. Among the documents seized was a screenplay draft. Title, Inheritance. Written by Nick Reiner. The plot. A successful Hollywood father is killed mysteriously. His struggling son inherits the rights to a famous script. But the catch is, the story starts changing, rewriting itself, until the truth of the murder is revealed. The twist? The son killed him. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't clever. It was a written fantasy. Nick had turned his real father's death into a creative blueprint. And in a way, the murder became the final scene. The vision board. Fame at any cost. Police also found a corkboard behind a curtain. Taped photos. Red string. Magazine cutouts. Old photos of Rob with celebrities. Tom Hanks. Martin Scorsese. Oprah. Nick's face was superimposed over Rob's and several of them. One cutout read, "Your time is up. My story begins." This wasn't just hatred. It was identity theft. He wasn't just angry at Rob's success. He wanted to erase it and wear it. And then, the last straw. A tech repairman came to fix Nick's Wi-Fi 2 days before the killings. He later told police something bone-chilling. Nick showed him a document on his computer, a manifesto of sorts, and said, "This is the script of my life. The final act is going to be unforgettable." When asked if it was for a movie, Nick reportedly chuckled. Something like that. The repairman thought it was weird, but chalked it up to Hollywood eccentricity. But now, he can't sleep. And the camera blind spot. Here's where the investigation took a wild turn. That high-tech camera system Nick had in the guest house. It showed everything. Every angle. Every movement. Except the path between the guest house and the main house. One tiny stretch of side garden, just 20 feet, was completely unmonitored. Guess how investigators believe Nick accessed the house the night of the murder? That exact path. They believe he planned it, practiced it, and waited for the right moment. The question no one wants to ask. Was Nick just mentally ill? Or was this premeditated evil? The journals, the drawings, the screenplay, the rehearsal. It all points to a man who didn't just snap. He orchestrated. He watched. He waited. And when the curtain lifted, he took center stage. But even now, there's one more twist. One more secret. Because Nick had a hard drive hidden behind a loose panel in the guest house wall. Encrypted. Triple-layered passwords. And when forensics finally cracked it open, they found videos. Dozens. One of them, time-stamped the night of the murders. But it doesn't show the crime. It shows Nick, sitting in his chair, smiling at the camera, and saying, "By the time you see this, I'll be the only Reiner left." But what detectives found next? Deep inside the audio files folder wasn't a video. It was a recording. A private argument between Rob and Nick, recorded days earlier, without Rob's knowledge. And in it, Rob says a single phrase that now haunts everyone who hears it. "If something happens to me, Billy will know what to do." What if your best friend left behind a message? Not for their lawyer, not for their kids, but for you, because deep down, they knew the end was coming. That's the haunting truth Billy Crystal now carries. Because buried inside that secret audio file, found on Nick's hidden hard drive, were not just chilling threats or disturbing rants. There was a final breadcrumb. A spoken signal from Rob Reiner. Soft, heavy, almost like a whisper. "If something happens to me, Billy will know what to do." And in that moment, everything changed. Because now, this wasn't just a story about murder. It was a story about friendship. Unshakable, unfiltered, and tragically, unheeded. So let's go back. Before the crime, before the cameras, before the headlines, to the beginning of a bond that not only shaped Hollywood, but ended in heartbreak. A friendship written in lightning. Rob Reiner and Billy Crystal met the way most legends do, by accident, but somehow always inevitable. It was 1974. Billy had just bombed an audition for a soap commercial. Rob, riding the success of All in the Family, had just been chewed out by CBS for pushing boundaries again. They both ended up at the same industry mixer. One joke led to another. One drink led to hours of riffing. By the end of the night, they were on stage performing an impromptu two-man act for a crowd of tipsy producers. It killed. That was the beginning. Two Jewish kids from New York. Two minds obsessed with timing, rhythm, and heart. They didn't just laugh together. They built each other. Growing together, step by step. The decades rolled on like a highlight reel. Rob directed. Billy starred. Billy wrote. Rob produced. Weddings. Baby showers. Hospital visits. Bar mitzvahs. Billy was there when Nick was born. In fact, he cut the cord. I was closer to that kid than I was to some of my own nephews, he'd once joked. They vacationed together every summer in Maui. Every Thanksgiving, Billy brought the pies. Rob brought his famous dad jokes. The ones that made even his wife Michelle roll her eyes. They had a code. Only one of us can be depressed at a time. It worked. For years. Until it didn't. When the laughs started to sound different. Something shifted after 2015. That was the year Being Charlie came out. The semi-autobiographical film about Nick's struggle with addiction and the pressure of being the son of a famous man. Billy had been supportive, but he also saw the tension underneath the promo tour smiles. Nick wouldn't sit next to Rob during interviews. He rolled his eyes when asked about the creative process. He said things like, "My dad had more edits than the editor." Rob laughed it off, but Billy saw it, felt it. That kid doesn't want collaboration, he told a friend privately. He wants control. From there, things spiraled. Nick started showing up less at family events. When he did, he seemed hollow, disconnected. Not angry, but something worse. Cold. "He's watching you, Rob." It was during a dinner at Dan Tana's when Billy first brought it up, directly. Nick had left early. Slammed the door after an awkward silence. Rob was sipping his third whiskey when Billy leaned in. "He's watching you, Rob. Not just like a son. Like a director watches an actor. Every move. Every word." Rob stared at his drink. "I know," he said softly. "I felt it too. But then, as always, he pulled back. He's my son. I've made mistakes. Maybe this is just how he processes." Billy didn't push that night, but he started watching back. The wedding incident. There was a moment few people talk about. One that never made the press. A producer's wedding in Napa Valley. Late 2019. Billy, Rob, Nick, and Michelle were all there. At the rehearsal dinner, Nick made a speech. Unplanned. He stood up, glass of wine in hand. Eyes glassy. "They say you can't choose your parents," he began. "But I would have auditioned someone else." Laughter. Nervous chuckles. But he didn't laugh. He kept going. "Rob Reiner. Big director. Big thinker. Big legacy. You know what it's like growing up with a dad whose shadow blocks out the sun?" "I do." Michelle grabbed his arm. But he shrugged her off. "Anyway, congrats to the happy couple. At least one of you won't be stuck in someone else's script." He sat down. Billy didn't clap. Neither did anyone else. Rob tried to joke it off, made a quip about tough crowd, even tougher son. But his face? Pale. Frozen. Billy leaned over. He crossed a line. Rob nodded. "I know." Billy tries again and again. After that wedding, Billy called Rob multiple times. Pushed harder. "This isn't just rebellion, Rob. This is rage. You need distance. For your safety. Have you ever locked your bedroom door at night?" Rob always responded the same way. "You're overreacting." He wouldn't do anything. He's hurting. He needs help. But Billy wasn't overreacting. He was remembering patterns. He had seen friends go through similar things with troubled adult children. And none of those stories ended well. A secret meeting with Michelle. In early November, Michelle called Billy. Asked to meet. Alone. They met at a small cafe in Santa Barbara. She wore sunglasses. Looked exhausted. "I need you to talk to Rob," she said. "I've tried." Then try again. Nick's getting worse. He watches him at night from the lawn. Last week I caught him copying his speeches from old award shows. Billy was stunned. Why? She shook her head. I think he wants to be him. Then she said something that would echo in Billy's mind forever. Nick doesn't just resent Rob. He wants to replace him. The promise they never got to fulfill. After that meeting, Billy called Rob again. Pushed harder than ever. Yelled, even. You have to get him out of the house. This isn't tough love, it's survival. That was when Rob said it. I'm working on it. Are you? Yes. I've written some things down. If anything happens, you'll know what to do. Billy didn't understand at the time. Now he does. It was that line. You'll know what to do. A friend's regret. Billy has since told friends he regrets not going to the police sooner. He regrets not pushing Michelle to leave. He regrets believing Rob when he said, I'm fine. But more than anything, he regrets not driving over that night. That one last call. That 10:21 p.m. unanswered moment. He should have gotten in the car. He should have knocked on the door. He should have been there. Mini cliffhanger to end Chapter 3. But just as Billy begins trying to piece it all together, he receives a USB drive in the mail. No return address. Just a sticky note. For words written in black ink. From Rob. Trust no one. Inside. A video file. Timestamped 3 weeks before the murders. And when Billy hits play, he sees Rob, sitting alone, trembling, whispering. If this is found, it means I'm dead. What would you do if your best friend left behind a video predicting their own murder, and it all pointed back to one night, one dinner, and one uninvited guest who changed everything? That's where this chapter begins. Because when Billy Crystal finished watching the video file labeled, Trust No One, he sat in silence. Mouth open, breath shallow. His hands trembled as the weight of Rob's fear finally settled into reality. The footage didn't just predict something bad. It revealed the night it all started to unravel. One dinner party, one final warning sign, and one cryptic toast that should have stopped everything, but didn't. The night they wanted to cancel. December 1st, 12 days before the murders, Rob and Michelle Reiner were hosting a small dinner party at their Brentwood home. Just 6 guests. Friends, colleagues, old family connections. Billy wasn't on the guest list. He had a theater benefit in New York. But he remembers the phone call Rob made the night before the dinner. I don't think we should do this, Rob had said. Michelle wants to cancel. I kind of do too. Billy pressed. Why? Nick's been weird lately. Pacing. Jittery. He said he wants to give a toast. That stopped Billy cold. A toast? Since when does Nick speak at parties? Rob chuckled uneasily. Exactly. But he insists. Says it's important. Cancel it, Rob. Michelle already ordered the caterers. What's the worst that could happen? Those would be the last casual words Billy would hear before the evening that changed everything. The guest list. The dinner included Rob Reiner, host. Michelle Reiner, co-host. Tom Gores, film financier. Linda Solomon, Rob's former editor. Greg Paulson, Rob's longtime cinematographer. Cheryl Adams, Michelle's cousin. Nick Reiner, uninvited until he let himself in. According to those present, Nick had not RSVP'd. He hadn't even been mentioned. But midway through appetizers, the door opened. Nick walked in, wearing a black turtleneck and holding a worn leather notebook. Not a word, just a stare. And everyone froze. Mind if I say a few words? Nobody knew what to say. Cheryl reportedly stood up, smiling awkwardly. Nick, what a surprise. Sit with us. Rob looked uneasy, but nodded toward an empty seat. Nick sat. Didn't eat. Didn't drink. He just stared at Rob, occasionally glancing at his notebook. Then, halfway through the main course, he stood, lifted his glass of water, and said, Mind if I say a few words? The room went silent. The toast no one forgot. This was no speech. This was a performance. Nick began slowly, flipping open the notebook. But he didn't read. He recited. Legacy. A word that haunts some. That defines others. That imprisons sons. Glances around the table. I was born into a house where greatness echoed through the halls. But greatness can be a cruel roommate. Eyes now locked on Rob. Tonight, I raise a glass. Not in celebration, but in conclusion. To fathers who forget that sons grow up. To stories that demand a rewrite. To the next chapter, where shadows become authors. He took a sip and sat down. No applause. Just stunned silence. Michelle's reaction. Michelle reportedly stood up and excused herself immediately after. Linda Solomon later told police, "I've been to Hollywood parties. I've heard monologues. But this wasn't that. This was a threat, dressed up like poetry." Tom Gores called it the coldest thing I've ever seen in a family setting. Greg Paulson tried to laugh it off. The kid's got drama in his blood, but even he admitted to friends afterward, "I felt like we were witnessing the prologue to something much worse." Rob's unusual response. When the guests left, Rob sat alone in the living room. He didn't say much. Cheryl, who stayed behind to help clean up, later recalled, "He was quiet. I asked if he was okay. He said, 'He's rehearsing something, and I don't know if I'm the audience or the target.' Then he laughed, but it was hollow, and he never smiled again that night." Security footage from that evening. Later, when investigators pulled the security tapes from the estate, they noticed something odd. At 2:14 a.m., hours after the guests had left, Nick was seen walking back to the main house. He wasn't carrying anything. He wasn't wearing the same turtleneck. He was barefoot, shirtless, just standing at the edge of the pool for 17 minutes. Then, he looked directly at one of the cameras, smiled, and walked back toward the guest house. That footage was time-stamped, December 2nd, just 10 days before the murders. A secret recording from the kitchen. But the most damning piece of the night came from a smart speaker in the kitchen. The Reiners had a voice-controlled assistant device that, unknown to them, had recorded part of a conversation between Rob and Michelle after the dinner. In it, Rob says, "He's crossed into something else, Michigan." She responds, "We have to do something. We can't wait for another toast." Rob sighs. Then, "Tomorrow, I'll call Billy. He'll know what to say to him." They never made that call. Nick's notebook, the dinner draft. Found on the floor of the guest house was Nick's leather-bound notebook, the same one he carried during the dinner. And inside was the exact speech, with one key difference. A line that wasn't read aloud that night. And to the audience still watching, don't look away. You'll want to see how this story ends. That line was underlined. Twice. Post-dinner fallout. The next morning, Michelle reportedly tried to convince Rob to ask Nick to leave the estate permanently. But Rob refused. He said he wanted to handle it gently. He wrote a letter, never sent it. He made a recording, never showed it. He planned to call Billy. He never did. Because on December 2nd, Rob suddenly canceled lunch plans. Told his assistant he wasn't feeling well. But the truth? He spent the entire day writing something. A document found hidden inside his office desk drawer. It began with, "If you're reading this, I was wrong." The line that haunts Billy. When Billy reviewed the files Rob had left behind, including the Trust No One video, he realized that Rob had begun preparing for something. Not legally, emotionally, psychologically. He knew Nick was dangerous, but he couldn't bring himself to say it out loud. He had written, in his own hand, "I kept thinking I was writing a drama. But this is a thriller." Billy stared at that line for hours, because it confirmed what he feared all along. Rob didn't just suspect Nick might hurt him. He knew. The dinner that should have ended it all. That dinner party could have been the turning point. A line in the sand. A final alarm bell. But instead, it became part of the build-up. Because no one acted fast enough. No one pushed hard enough. And no one thought it would go this far. But Nick? He wasn't just planning. He was performing. Testing reactions. Scripting his finale. And according to a former friend, who came forward anonymously, Nick even described that dinner in chilling terms. "I call that night the table red." But as investigators dig deeper, they uncover something even more disturbing. A deleted draft from Nick's laptop, recovered through forensic software. A screenplay. Title, The Last Toast. And the final scene? A man stabs his father in the kitchen, then carves a single word into the wall. A word that now exists in real life, written in blood in the Reiners' home. Charlie. What if the person you idolize becomes the person you need to erase, just to feel real? That question sits at the heart of this chapter. Because once investigators recovered Nick's deleted drafts, once they matched his fictional scenes to real-world moments, the case stopped being about a sudden breakdown. It became about obsession, a slow-burn fixation that turned admiration into resentment, and resentment into something far darker. And to understand it, we have to understand how Nick saw his father, not as a parent, but as a symbol he believed was suffocating him. From hero to obstacle. When Nick was young, Rob Reiner wasn't just dad. He was magic. The man whose name made adults lean in. The man whose friends filled rooms with laughter. The man who could make a phone call and change a life. Nick adored him. Teachers noticed it early. Nick would introduce himself at school as Rob Reiner's son. He bragged. He beamed. He soaked it in. But admiration has a shadow. And as Nick grew older, that shadow grew longer. By his teens, classmates no longer saw Nick as Nick. They saw him as the son of. By his 20s, industry meetings began the same way. Your dad must be so proud. And ended the same way. Tell Rob we said hi. Nick didn't feel seen. He felt overwritten. The comparison trap. People often say children of famous parents have it easy. Doors open. Opportunities appear. But what they don't talk about? The comparisons. Every script Nick wrote was compared to Rob's films. Every idea was measured against a legacy that spanned decades. Every failure felt public. Permanent. In one journal entry, Nick wrote, "If I succeed, it's because of him. If I fail, it's because I'm not him." That line is key, because it shows a man who felt trapped in a no-win equation. And when someone believes they can't win, they look for a way to end the game. Charlie, the alter ego. So let's talk about that word again. Charlie. At first, everyone assumed it referred to being Charlie, the film Nick co-wrote with Rob. A troubled young man, addiction, recovery, father-son conflict. But forensic psychologists reviewing Nick's writings saw something else. Charlie wasn't just a character. Charlie was a container. A place Nick put his anger, his jealousy, his fantasies. In multiple entries, Nick switches from I to Charlie. Charlie watches him from the other room. Charlie knows how this ends. Charlie isn't afraid to do what needs to be done. Charlie became permission, a way to detach, a way to imagine actions without owning them. And when Charlie stopped being confined to the page, that's when things crossed the line. The mirror moment. One detail stands out to investigators. Nick had installed a full-length mirror in the guest house, directly across from his writing desk. Not unusual. But etched into the corner of the mirror, barely visible, were 3 words. Be him. Better. Friends who visited once said Nick would sit there for hours, staring at his reflection, rehearsing speeches from Rob's old award ceremonies. Same cadence. Same pauses. Sometimes, he'd change the words, inserting his own name. It wasn't parody. It wasn't practice. It was rehearsal. Love and hatred, entangled. Here's the contradiction that makes this case so unsettling. Nick loved his father deeply. He saved old voicemails, kept childhood photos on his desk, defended Rob fiercely online when critics attacked him. But love, when mixed with resentment, can rot. Nick didn't just want Rob's approval. He wanted Rob's position, the respect, the authority, the center stage. In one unsent email draft found on Nick's laptop, he wrote, "If he disappeared, people would finally have to listen to me." That sentence isn't rage. It's logic, twisted, but deliberate. The day everything shifted. According to Michelle's sister, there was a moment, months before the murders, when Nick and Rob had a private argument in the driveway. No yelling, no threats, just one sentence that changed everything. Rob allegedly said, "You don't have to be me to matter." Nick reportedly froze, then replied, "That's easy for you to say," and walked away. From that day on, Nick's behavior shifted. Less volatile, more controlled, more quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't peace, it's planning. Why no one saw it coming? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Nick didn't look like a monster. He looked like a brooding writer, a damaged artist, a guy struggling under pressure. He didn't lash out publicly. He didn't make threats. He internalized. And that made him dangerous. Because people tend to fear explosions. They don't fear slow, silent erosion. Rob didn't fear Nick. He feared hurting him. And that compassion may have blinded him. The therapist's note. Among the sealed documents was a therapist's note, never shared with the family. It read, "Patient exhibits identity fusion with father figure. Expresses desire for separation through symbolic erasure rather than physical distance." Symbolic erasure. Think about that phrase. Not escape, not independence. Erasure. To Nick, Rob wasn't just a father. He was a story that needed rewriting. The final turn inward. In the final week, Nick stopped writing new material. Stopped pitching. Stopped posting. Instead, he reread old journals, Old drafts, old scenes, as if he were studying, preparing. And according to metadata from his laptop, he watched the same clip repeatedly. Rob's acceptance speech from years earlier. The standing ovation. The applause. The moment of recognition Nick believed would never be his. That applause became a trigger. Not joy, but fury. A question for you. Ask yourself this. How far could obsession take someone? If they believe their entire identity depends on removing one person, would they hesitate? Would they stop? Or would they convince themselves it's necessary? Nick did the latter. And by the time anyone realized the depth of that obsession, it had already crossed from thought to action. But just when investigators thought they understood Nick's motive, a new discovery complicated everything. Because hidden inside Rob's personal safe wasn't just a letter. It was evidence that Rob had started taking steps to change the situation. Steps Nick may have discovered. Steps that could explain why the timeline suddenly accelerated, and why the end came sooner than anyone expected. What if the only proof of what really happened was caught on a camera and then mysteriously disappeared? Security cameras don't lie. They don't blink. They don't forget. But sometimes they go missing. That's what happened at the Reiner estate in Brentwood. And what investigators found and didn't find in those surveillance files turned this case from a tragic family crime into a chilling psychological thriller. Because hidden inside that perfectly manicured property was a quiet digital witness. A system of eyes that saw everything, until someone made it go dark. A high-tech fortress. Rob Reiner wasn't careless. The Brentwood estate had top-tier security, not just because of who he was, but because of how many times he'd dealt with stalkers, overzealous fans, and tabloid photographers. The system was professional-grade. 14 exterior cameras. For motion-activated night vision devices. 24/7 recording with redundant cloud storage. A panic button installed in the kitchen. Backup power that kicked in during outages. It was a fortress, but it wasn't just protecting Rob from the outside world. It was supposed to protect him from what was happening inside. The surveillance timeline. Investigators immediately requested footage for the night of December 14th, the date the murders occurred. What they expected to find. Motion on the side path. Footage of Nick entering the main house. Sound triggers. Alerts. Anything. What they found instead. Gaps. Massive gaps. 10:38 p.m. to 3:02 a.m. Side yard camera feed frozen. Kitchen interior cam. Offline. Office hallway. Corrupted footage. Audio triggers. All mysteriously disabled. The file log indicated manual override. Someone had disabled the system. Not from outside. From within the network. And only one person had the admin password. Nick Reiner. The missing hours. Let's break it down. From 9:30 p.m. to 10:30 p.m., Rob was seen moving through the house normally. He was in the kitchen, making tea. He walked into his office. He watched part of To Kill a Mockingbird on the Den TV. At 10:21 p.m., he got a call from Billy Crystal, the one answered by Nick. And that's where the trail goes cold. At 10:25 p.m., the kitchen camera froze. At 10:27 p.m., the hallway camera looped back to an earlier timestamp. At 10:29 p.m., the feed shut down. And when it reactivated at 3:02 a.m., the kitchen lights were on. The floor was wet. And there were two bodies. No movement. No sound. No footage of Nick leaving. Almost like the house had skipped over the entire nightmare. The cloud backup mystery. But what about the cloud storage? Security professionals designed the Reiner system with redundancy. Every second of footage uploaded in real time to a secure server. But when detectives accessed the account, those files were missing too. Not corrupted. Deleted. Manually. The log showed a full system wipe at 3:12 a.m. Exactly 10 minutes after the cameras turned back on. But here's the kicker. The deletion wasn't done from Rob's house. It was done from Nick's laptop. IP traced. Confirmed. The timing wasn't a coincidence. It was cleanup. The path he walked. The one remaining camera that wasn't disabled. A fisheye lens covering the north driveway. At 2:43 a.m., it caught a figure walking barefoot across the garden. Long, hunched stride. No jacket. No shoes. Nick, carrying what appeared to be a towel and a box of gloves. He moved quickly, didn't look at the camera, as if he knew exactly where its blind spots were. At 2:47 a.m., he vanished into the side entrance of the main house. At 3:02 a.m., The cameras turned back on. But Nick was never seen leaving. That's because by the time the system rebooted, he was back in the guest house, taking a shower. The shower footage, one camera, internal to the guest house, captured Nick stepping out of the bathroom. 2:59 a.m. Hair wet, face calm. He walked to his desk, opened his laptop, and began typing. The system logs confirmed it. He accessed the surveillance admin console, entered the wipe command, deleted 5 hours of footage from every camera. Then he shut the laptop, sat back, and smiled. Audio file discovery, hidden microphone. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. A backup microphone, part of a smart speaker in Rob's office, was still active. It captured ambient noise starting at 11:52 p.m. What it recorded changes everything. It started with voices, raised, male and female. Rob and Michelle arguing. Then a slam. Then silence. Then a voice. Male, but not yelling. Calm. Soft. Saying, "You shouldn't have made me choose." Then 3 loud bangs. A pause. One more bang. Then the sound of something metal falling. And finally, footsteps. Fading. Away from the office. Back through the hall. Back toward the guest house. Nick's cover-up. The details that didn't work. For all his planning, Nick left behind clues. A drop of blood in the grass between the main house and guest house. A used latex glove in a hedge. DNA matched to Rob and Michelle. A search on his laptop browser. How long does it take to bleed out from a stomach wound? He also made one fatal mistake. He assumed the smart speaker hadn't been set to always listening. But Rob, paranoid in recent years, had kept the feature on. It became the one digital witness Nick hadn't thought to silence. The cameras he couldn't erase. 2 exterior neighbors had Ring cameras. Across the street, facing the Reiner property from a distance. At 2:41 a.m., one captured Nick, in dark clothes, crouching behind a bush, watching the main house. At 2:56 a.m., the same camera captured a faint flash from the kitchen window. Detectives believe it was the light reflecting off the blade. That image, grainy and low-res, became the only known footage of the murder in progress. But what disturbed them most? Nick looked directly at the neighbor's camera, smirked, and kept walking. Why it matters? This wasn't a sudden act of violence. It was a staged event. Filmic, calculated, even edited. Nick didn't just murder his parents. He tried to erase the evidence like a director recutting a film. He chose which scenes stayed, which ones vanished, which ones were left on the cutting room floor. But one sound escaped his edit. One sentence. From Rob. Moments before he died. Captured by the smart speaker. "Nick, you don't have to do this. Please. I love you." But as police were wrapping up their forensic analysis, an intern noticed something strange. Inside the audio files, a mislabeled file with a fake timestamp. When they opened it, they heard Nick's voice, speaking calmly, deliberately, as if reading a script. This is the truth, the version no one else will tell. And when you hear it, you'll understand why it had to happen. It wasn't a confession. It was a monologue. And what came next would turn the entire case on its head. What kind of man leaves behind a letter for the moment he knows he won't be there to read it? Not a will, not a goodbye, but a final confession. Rob Reiner wasn't naive. He wasn't oblivious. And despite everything, despite the laughter, the legendary career, the decades of optimism, there was a part of him, deep down, that feared the story of his life might end in tragedy. And that fear? It lived inside a fireproof safe in his home office. A safe no one had opened in years. Until the night after his death, when detectives cracked it open. What they found inside wasn't just heartbreaking. It changed the entire motive behind the case. Because this wasn't just a story of a son obsessed. This was a father preparing for betrayal. The safe, untouched for years. Behind a bookshelf lined with awards, scripts, and memorabilia from The Princess Bride, and When Harry Met Sally, there was a tall steel safe built into the wall. It was the kind of thing Rob had installed after a robbery scare in the early 2000s, a security measure he almost forgot about. Keypad locked, biometric enabled, and according to Michelle's calendar app, it hadn't been accessed in over 5 years. Until December 15th. Detectives, searching for a secondary will or insurance policy, pried it open. Inside were 3 things. A red folder marked for Billy, a sealed manila envelope labeled "Read if I'm gone," A small flash drive with a handwritten note. Play this last. For Billy, the friendship that never broke. Let's start with the red folder. It was filled with handwritten letters, notes, memories, old Polaroids from the 70s, a script idea they never made, a napkin from a diner where Rob and Billy outlined their someday road trip comedy. But taped to the inside flap was a page torn from a yellow legal pad. In shaky handwriting, it read, "If you're reading this, it means I didn't listen. You did. You always did. You were right, Billy. About him. About the danger. I couldn't see it. Or maybe I refused to. Maybe love makes you blind on purpose. Please do what I couldn't. Tell the truth. And protect what's left." The page was signed. R. Reiner. Deck 8 to 4:16 a.m. Billy would later say, "That letter broke me more than the funeral did." Because he realized. Rob had known. The manila envelope. A father's fears. The envelope labeled, "Read if I'm gone," was different. It was a structured document. More clinical. Almost like a legal brief, written in Rob's voice. It began, "This isn't a suicide note. It's a timeline. A record of things I can't say out loud. Things I'm afraid will be dismissed if I do." Then it listed key events. 2017. First signs of paranoia in Nick. 2019. Therapy breakdown. Accusation that Rob had stolen his identity. 2021. Michelle's suggestion that Nick be asked to move out. 2023. July. Rob's note. Caught Nick recording my private call. 2023. September. Rob found pages of script describing my death scene. Then a final line. "If anything happens to me, start with the guest house. But also, ask why I stayed silent." Because that's the question Rob struggled with more than any other. Why didn't he act? Why didn't he cut Nick off? Why didn't he leave? The real reason, a hidden clause. Inside the same envelope was a legal document from 2016, a trust agreement. And tucked inside it was a hidden clause, one Rob had added quietly. It gave Nick full access to the Reiner intellectual property rights in the event of Rob's incapacitation or death, including residuals, script rights, director's commentary archives, several unproduced screenplays. Michelle hadn't known. Billy hadn't known. And the chilling part? The clause was contingent on Rob not altering the terms in writing by 2025. Rob had planned to revoke it. He had made a note to call the attorney on December 15th, the morning after he was murdered. Let that sink in. The flash drive, play this last. Finally, there was the flash drive. Billy waited until everyone had left the room. Then, trembling, he inserted it into his laptop. A video file loaded. Timestamp, December 10th, just 4 days before the murders. In the footage, Rob is seated in his office, wearing a flannel shirt, pale, exhausted. He looks into the camera and says, "I always thought stories ended with resolution. I thought being a father was about unconditional love. But sometimes that love gets weaponized." He pauses. "Nick, if you're watching this, I want you to know something. I forgive you, even if you don't stop. Even if you do what I'm afraid you might. I forgive you." He exhales. "But if you're someone else watching this, if I'm gone, please don't let the story end there. Don't protect the myth. Tell the truth. Because the world deserves to know what silence costs." The screen fades to black. One final text appears. "Legacy is not worth a life." Billy's response. Grief turns to purpose. When Billy saw that video, he didn't cry. He stared at the screen for nearly 10 minutes. Then he picked up his phone. He called Rob's lawyer. Then Rob's publicist. Then 2 journalists he'd sworn he'd never speak to again. Because now, this wasn't about protecting privacy. It was about protecting the truth. And Billy would later say in an interview, he left the clues. He just didn't think they'd be needed. That was the worst part. He still had hope. The motive revealed. When this evidence was presented in court, the prosecution made it clear. This wasn't just a crime of passion. This was a deliberate silencing. Nick had discovered that Rob was preparing to revoke his rights, remove him from the trust, and possibly initiate a restraining order, all of which would have severed Nick's access to the very legacy he'd built his identity around. Nick's motive? Simple, twisted, devastating. If he couldn't inherit the legacy, he'd take it by force. The final entry, the last page of Rob's private notebook, also found in the safe, carried just one line. "There's a difference between being loved and being needed. I wish I'd known which one mattered more." But just when investigators thought the safe had revealed all it could, they noticed one final anomaly. A tiny second compartment, hidden in the back of the safe wall. Inside, a USB drive no one expected. Encrypted, unlabeled. And when they cracked it open, they found something that hadn't been seen in decades. Footage of young Nick being interviewed by Rob. And what the child version of Nick says at the end of that footage leaves everyone speechless.